Please welcome to the stage St. Paul's Chief Resilience Officer, Russ Stark.
So as the Chief Resilience Officer, I'm really responsible for thinking about the city's climate action and sustainability broadly. And that has led us down this path to an innovative partnership in the realm of car share. How many of you have used car share before? Zipcar, Car2Go in some places, others. I see definitely some hands. Car share has been around for about 20 years, and in general, Zipcar's been kind of the industry leader in the US for a long time. Cities have typically allowed car share to happen in their communities. We've typically charged these vendors in order to be in our communities, to use the right-of-way, et cetera, to be permitted. Some of you may remember Car2Go. They came to the Twin Cities and went. And it was really kind of a disappointment because people's lives started to depend on the availability of this vehicle as a secondary complementary way for them to move around town. And we really got tired of seeing these kind of new mobility options come to town and leave. And so we in St. Paul are really flipping the script on the idea of car share. We've decided that car share should be a form of public transportation, essentially. And so early 2022, we'll be launching the country's first city-owned, 100% renewably powered electric car share program. City-owned fleet, we are partnering with a local nonprofit that will actually operate the car share system. People will be incentivized to bring the vehicle back to one of our public charging stations. They'll get a credit toward their next trip. It's a public-heavy, public-private partnership where we've decided that our community needs this service in a way that we haven't had it reliably. And as part of that public view of what this partnership needs to look like, we've insisted on affordable rates. We've insisted on the system focusing on our lowest income and BIPOC communities in terms of where the service is going to be available. And I'll get into a little bit more detail. I don't have to tell you anything about the climate crisis because all of us are familiar with this challenge. You here in Philadelphia with the recent flooding, we just had one of the most massive tornadoes in the country's history tear through the Midwest and South in December. In St. Paul this summer, we had the worst air quality in the history of the state of Minnesota from fires at the Canadian border. The worst flooding in the history of the Mississippi River, which travels between us and Minneapolis a couple of years ago. We all know that we have to quickly eliminate the use of fossil fuels. And we have to do it not to save some idea of a planet that is out there. We have to do it to save the humans. In the city of St. Paul, we developed a climate action resilience plan in 2019. And we did a lot of analysis about how can we reduce greenhouse gas emissions over time. And in the transportation sector, most people, when they think about using less fossil fuels, they think about electric cars, and rightfully so. But we know from our analysis that even within a really aggressive and fast transition to electric cars, we can't reduce emissions fast enough to meet the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change or the UN goals based on the science of a 50% reduction by the end of this decade. So we know that we actually have to first drive less and then electrify all of our transportation machines. And so we're investing in those ways that people drive less. We're investing in better facilities for biking and walking and making it safer for people to use those options. We're prioritizing transit on our streets. And we think car share should be a new publicly offered component of what that overall system looks like that allows people to use a vehicle, and a zero emission vehicle at that, to move around town. Our definition of climate justice that we use in St. Paul is really focused on ensuring that our climate actions are benefiting our most vulnerable populations. And because of institutional racism and the history that you all are aware of and that we've talked about here today and last night, we know that our Black, Indigenous, and people of color are front and center in terms of folks in our community who really need to benefit from the actions that we're taking to reduce emissions. And so we know that those folks are exposed to more pollution because of where they live, near the interstate freeway system, et cetera. We know that in general, they actually are responsible for fewer emissions because their lifestyles, they own fewer cars, they're in smaller homes. And that in spite of that fact, they experience higher rates of asthma. So we come to ask ourselves, who are electric cars for? And who is car share for? We know that electric cars today are still more expensive than a gas car to purchase up front, even though much cheaper to fuel, much cheaper to maintain. So that's a pretty significant barrier right there to our lower income populations. We know that car share historically has mostly been offered in larger cities, in the densest parts of those cities, and that you have to have a smartphone and a credit card to access the system. And so lo and behold, most of the users of car share are people who are college students, most of them are white, most of them are educated, highly educated, and that doesn't make any sense. Like, a shared vehicle should be available to the people who don't own a vehicle. And our community, a lot of the folks who don't own vehicles are people of color and of lower education who may not have that smartphone or credit card. So those are some of the things we kept in mind in designing this program. So St. Paul's response to this combination of factors is what we call EVIE, EVIE, car share, and our new EV Spot charging network. Because to run an electric vehicle car share program, you gotta have some place to charge the cars. And so we are simultaneously investing in this new fleet of electric cars and a new system of 70 charging locations around town, on street, out in the public, where at each location, there will be a couple of spots that are dedicated to the EV car share program, a couple of other spots that are available for people to charge their privately owned EVs. There was just an article in the Washington Post this week about the EV charging deserts in Black communities across the country, and we are working to address that desert. But it's also not right to just drop EV charging in a neighborhood where people don't have the access to buy an EV. And so we are actually making EVs accessible to folks who can't afford to buy one through this program. We, in partnership with our nonprofit car share provider, Our Car, our partners across the river in the city of Minneapolis, our electric utility, XL, collectively kind of came up with the idea for this program and thought it made some sense, but we didn't assume that we knew what we were talking about. We went and tested it, and we actually paid folks in the neighborhoods where this service was going to be new in focus groups and surveys to tell us if what we thought made sense actually made sense in terms of the design of this program. Cities don't really get a chance to do that most of the time, and so I have to credit the mayors earlier today talked about their friend Mike Bloomberg. Well, he's been funding some of this work for us through the American Cities Climate Challenge, which has been a big boon to this project. This network is going to cover about a third of the geographies of St. Paul and Minneapolis initially, with a focus on our lowest income communities. And just to give you a sense of what the service is going to look like, there is going to be an app that people can use to identify where the nearest car is, to reserve it for 15 minutes while they get from wherever they are to where that car is. If you don't have a smartphone though, you can look it up online, and there's a 24-hour phone number that you can call to say, where's the nearest car? I want to go use it. You, as a member of the service, have a card that is your personal identifier that may actually be your transit pass. They have a partnership with our transit operator where your transit pass can be that personal identifier. and then you can go use the car. You can finish your trip like the old car-to-go system as long as you park the car anywhere within the service territory of the system on the street. You don't have to bring it back to the spot where you started. So you can take a one-way trip. You could take the bus into downtown, and then because you're leaving later in the evening and bus service is bad at that time of night, you could drive one of the EVs back, as an example. There's going to be a process for users to self-certify that they're low-income users. We've seen a lot of programs targeting low-income folks in transit and elsewhere, where the process of proving your status is a barrier to access. We're just going to ask you to self-certify that you're low income, and then you will qualify for the low income rate for this program. And to give you a sense of cost, that rate is going to be $1 a month to be part of the system. And then using the car is $9 an hour. There's no minimum time, no minimum trip length. A 20-minute trip in an EV will cost you $3 or $4. We are getting ready to launch in less than ideal in January in St. Paul. We actually piloted this program in July for about a month, testing the tech, testing the vehicles with the existing members of the car share provider. It worked well. The Chevy Bolts that we own are currently under recall, and we're making sure that those vehicles are perfectly safe before we put them back out on the street. But we are going to launch in January. The full system will be built out by the summer of 22. And so we don't have a lot of data to share with you about the success of our program yet, but we do know that we have created something new. We didn't create it out of whole cloth. We went out to LA and learned what they did. We followed what Indianapolis did many years ago. Blue LA is the closest cousin to our program. But in every case, those other programs, there's never been a city that actually owned the fleet of vehicles and decided this was a public service. And so that is new. And as far as we know, it's the first 100% renewably powered EV car share system in North America. We think there's one in Europe, but we're not sure. So anyway, we're pretty proud of that. And it's just been a real pleasure to be here. We hope Philadelphia copies this idea. I feel like the day has been really great and really kind of a lot of talk about policy and philosophy and approach. And this is a much more like, here's a really specific thing that we're doing. And so I've loved the mix. We hope you'll do it here. We hope everybody does it. And thanks for having me. Have a great day.